Welcome. I am so glad to see so many people here. Um, I'm going to mostly hand this over to Jane Jackson to introduce everyone, but I'm Jolene Johnson. I'm one of the co-leaders for this group, and I just want to say thank you for spending your Saturday morning and learning about some great physics instruction. I'm really excited about our speaker, so I'll hand it over to Jane.
Hello. Modeling instruction began at Arizona State University around 1990. The co-founders were Professor of Physics David Hestenes and high school physics teacher Malcolm Wells. One of the original um, Arizona teachers who learned modeling instruction was Melissa Girmscheid's high school physics teacher. So Melissa got a really good start in and and Melissa has had a whole lifetime full of service to the community since then, for which she's gotten numerous awards. You can Google her and read about many of the awards that she's gotten. But I'd like to stress the service that she's done to humanity, basically, with her compassion and wisdom and skills directed toward physics teaching primarily, but extending far beyond that into policy. And her most recent effort was running for school board. Hooray! That was a tough one. Yeah, but so without further ado, here's Melissa Girmscheid.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, Jane has built me up a lot, but I will do my best. Welcome, everyone. As Jane said, my name is Melissa Girmscheid. I am a National Board Certified Teacher, union leader, and most importantly, a modeler. I currently teach at a large, comprehensive, and I always say large, with about 2,600 students in grades 9 through 12 in suburban Phoenix. I'm going to, you know what? I feel like, and Jane kind of talked about it a little bit. I cannot talk about modeling instruction and why I'm a modeler without recognizing this kid. So this is me, in case that wasn't obvious. This is me, my junior year in high school. I come from a family of teachers. My grandmother was actually a teacher during World War II before she gave it up and had her kids. My dad was a longtime high school math teacher. Um, and my mom had always wanted to be a teacher. She actually went back to school after I did, became a teacher after I graduated from college. Um, but in my mind, at this point in time, I was bound and determined that I was going to be an elementary gifted and talented teacher. That's what I wanted to do in my mind. But I always loved science. My favorite book when I was a kid was A Wrinkle in Time. I totally wanted to be Meg Murray. She had a science lab in her house. For those of you who know, so I was committed that that's what I wanted. I wanted a lab, like a full chemistry lab in my house. I thought that was so cool. I got into high school. My earth science class, honestly, I don't remember anything from it other than I don't feel I learned anything from it. I remember that, we used to talk in class all the time. I remember we sat in rows. I don't remember any of the content that tells you the impression that it made on me. I remember getting to biology and that we took notes, we did dissections, but I remember it didn't really engage me. And it wasn't until I had a chemistry teacher who honestly let us do a lot of our own explanation where I started to feel like, I really love science again. Like I had years where I didn't necessarily like it because of the way that it was taught. But like Jane said, my physics teacher had this, hidden talent up her sleeve. So she was a modeler. She had gone to ASU. She had taken the modeling workshop the summer before I was in her class. And this really awakened something in me. I absolutely loved her class. And there was a lot of challenge to it. but we got to collaborate together. We got to talk to one another. I remember being very hands-on. And it's funny because going from, my freshman year, my earth science class making almost no impression to me, where I don't remember at all. My senior year, that physics class, I remember almost everything. It was such a strong impression, and I absolutely loved it. I am very fortunate in how my journey from like there in that physics modeler's classroom to now has really formulated. I left high school still thinking I want to be a gifted and talented teacher. And that didn't quite work out, but I came right back, like what class really energized me? And it was coming back to that physics class. I was fortunate at ASU, my physics teaching methods class was a modeling workshop. And so I came right back into it. I did not know that that's what my teacher did in high school. No high school student really knows what pedagogy their teacher is using. But as soon as I sat in that modeling workshop, I thought, well, that's exactly what she was doing. I recognized the resources. I recognized the methods. We're doing the same thing that we did in high school. It's like, oh, this makes sense. This is what this does. So from then to now, though, there were some steps that really formulated me into the modeler that I am today. So coming out of college, I went to a district where, fortunately, one of my colleagues at another school was my former high school physics teacher. And I worked with a group where we all the physics teachers across that district were modelers. We worked together. We were very collaborative. We made sure that modeling was what our students experienced. And so that really, I only spent 2 years there before I had kids and just life happened. But that really helped shape me to think, this is what I want. This particular pedagogy is what's going to make me the teacher that I want to be. After taking some time off with my kids, I then moved back to a district where my children were going at the time. And again, physics modelers across the district. But now we're sprinkling in some chemistry modelers too. And this district actually gave me a lot. This is where I decided that, modeling is where I want to devote my time. While I was there, this is when I went back to ASU. I got my Master's in Natural Sciences degree, which M&S program is amazing and is completely centered around modeling instruction. I got my national board certification. A big part of that is classroom experience, and a modeling classroom is a phenomenal example of classroom experience that involves students and is student focused, and where I could rationalize every single thing that I did because it just made sense. While I was in that district, I also started getting involved with the AMTA board, served on the board for AMTA for 4 years through the presidential cycle, got to help move AMTA towards its future path, which I will talk about a little bit later. Got involved with the computational modeling physics first with Bootstrap grant. And then really which is now my current job, my dream job, I moved to a district where modeling instruction was supposed to be the norm. It was completely expected. They actually wanted me because of my background in modeling. And one of the things that my principal said during my interview completely cemented my desire to be there. She said that she wanted modelers because modelers teach students to do science the way scientists do science. And to me, I thought that's the person I want to work for. If she realizes that that's what I am aiming for, to have my students doing science in an authentic way that makes sense to them, that will help them in the future, no matter what their path is, then that's exactly the school I want to be at. So I currently teach physics first, working with the computational modeling physics first with Bootstrap grant. I was writing resources and teaching teachers to teach physics first. and thought, well, I really need to have that backing behind it and show I can do it, and found that I absolutely love teaching physics first because I get to be the first modeler that the vast majority of my students ever see. And so I set that expectation for them for the rest of high school. And we are very fortunate that the rest of the teachers that they have throughout high school are also modelers. So I get to see this wonderful fruit of all of my work as I walk around and see other classes and see my students really being the scientists I trained them to be. So I wanted to talk about what modeling instruction means in my classroom. I will give an overview of what modeling instruction is, but I wanted to make this personal. So I have pictures of students throughout the years of things that we were doing to kind of give you a picture. I'll set some background. This is my AP physics class from 2018. They are starting a unit on rotational motion. And what we are doing is I taught them some yoga moves. We're outside doing yoga so they can learn to balance. So they're taking pictures. You can see a couple of them on their phone. They are on their phone with purpose. They're taking pictures so that they can see how people have moved their bodies in order to balance in these positions. I was giving them plenty of positions where they're maybe standing on one foot, balancing in kind of a squat position, giving them things to do that would cause them, in order to balance, to shift their weight around a little bit. And so the whole point of this was that they're going to go inside and then kind of diagram it out and come up with some ideas. We came back into classroom and collaborated on this. So this is a very typical day in my classroom where you can see that there are conversations going on. There's some giggling going on because we're trying things out. But the whole goal is that students are going to collaborate. So we're examining this phenomenon of balance in order to find some deeper meaning. And in modeling instruction, one of the first things that we do every unit is develop our model. And this is completely student driven. So here my students have a mystery tube. It has, you can see 2 ropes coming out of it. Actually has another 2 on down towards the end where the student with the striped shirt is holding it. And so you can see that there's a whiteboard in front of them, the students standing around. They are collecting some evidence to determine what it might look like inside. And since they are doing this, they're kind of coming up with what would it look like inside. They're coming up with possible solutions, possible ideas, with the idea that we're going to then try to recreate it. While that might be an activity, let me show you some of the paradigm labs that are very common in my classroom. In modeling instruction, starting an instructional unit or looking at a new concept means students are going to collect data, analyze that data, communicate that data to one another in order to represent what's going on and try to construct this mental model of what is happening, what the behavior of the system is. So I've got some various ones. These are all coming from a combination in the bottom left. That's an AP physics class. And the top left and onto the right, those would be a regular general physics class focused on mechanics. All of those were taught in a block schedule. For modeling, I loved a block schedule. I don't teach in one anymore, but a block schedule meant that my students could construct their lab. They could talk about what they might find, come up with their questions they're going to answer, set up their apparatus, collect their data, analyze their data, and many times communicate data and collaborate with one another, all within the 90-minute class period. So it was very conducive for us to come up with that meaning and develop that initial model together in that 90-minute class period. Now with the 56-minute, I do things a little bit differently. I have to break it off, plus teaching ninth graders, we have to break into a little bit more chunks to make it more palatable for them. but a 90-minute, if you teach a 90-minute block, 90-minute block in modeling instruction is amazing. So during all of these, top left would be it is a Hooke's Law examination. Bottom left is a uniform acceleration paradigm lab. And on the right, this is a modified Atwood's machine. They're looking at force, mass, and acceleration. My students are going to run a lab, come up with relationships between variables. And the whole point is they are going to collaborate together. So just like scientists would do in a lab, they're all running their experiments, collecting, and then we're going to be a scientific community together, share what we know, and see if we need to make refinements. They're building on everything that they have learned throughout the semester, and all of those science and engineering practices from those next generation science standards are all embedded within. We're using the cross-cutting standards constantly. My students are looking at patterns, cause and effect, system and system models throughout everything that they're doing. But this paradigm lab will kick off our unit. In modeling, we follow the modeling cycles. So you saw it in the model development there. My students were observing phenomena. They were asking questions, analyzing, interpreting data, constructions and explanations, and then they're going to develop that model. For example, the uniform acceleration, they've already looked at a constant velocity model. But when they roll that, it's basically a disc with an axle through it. When they roll that down a ramp, they'll notice that that constant velocity model no longer fits. So we have a need to refine what we already know. And so they are going to, from that, observing that phenomena, realizing it doesn't quite fit the model they already have, we need to analyze, interpret new data, and construct some new explanations, build upon what we already have. So that paradigm lab, and actually we can come back to that model development portion of the cycle throughout an instructional unit. It's going to be a constant thing. It is not linear. I love this graphic because it completely is cyclical. Once my students see that something doesn't quite fit the model that they have already constructed, then we go back. The second part, or the later part you'll see in that graphic, is model deployment. Once students have developed this mental model that includes everything from explanations to graphs to diagrams to just speaking and collaborating with one another, because sometimes the best way for my students to express what they are finding is to talk it through. And then I can have somebody talking it through and another person who starts, wait, do you mean this? And they start drawing it out. And that's when light bulbs go off in the classroom. So once they've developed that model, now it's time to deploy it. And you'll notice that now we're going to make predictions, argue for evidence, and refine the model, and it just comes right on back. What that might look like in the classroom, here's my students collaborating together on several things that they have done. So you can see some pictures that are very likely from 2020, 2021 with my students with masks on. And the ones on the bottom left are just from last year. They're current students, so I did cover up some faces there. But you can see that they are using, all of this is model deployment. They have developed already a model, an initial model during that paradigm lab. And now they are faced with new situations. And using the models they have, they are working to explain these new situations. And the best way for my students to do this and to come up with new meaning is to have a whiteboard meeting. So you can see that I've got a top left, that'd be just a couple of student teams that are working together. Same on the top right. On the bottom left, the rest of that picture, you can kind of see it. There's a second group. So one of the best parts, one of the staples of modeling instructions is that whiteboard meeting. And this can be done in several different ways. One of the things I have learned over the years through all of my experience working with other modelers, whether it be modelers that I teach with, modelers who work in my district, modelers that I learn from at workshops, or modelers that I learn from because I'm leading the workshops. I've learned to refine these board meetings so that we can constantly change things up. and I can make this so it's relevant for my students. So having those tools in my back pocket has been an important part of making me the modeler I am today. And these conversations in the classroom are amazing. What you can see on the bottom left is you see some windows. That my school has windows into the hallway, so people walking by can see what's going on. And I absolutely love that I get visits from administration all the time because they want to see what my students are talking about. They can see these board meetings going on, and they'll walk in and will just join a group. They think it's fascinating that the students are talking through everything. I love this picture in the top left. You see one student holding the board and the other one is like explaining everything. And what happened right after that is the one in the boy in the towards the front with the short hair and the dark shirt. He immediately, you can see him kind of leaning into that picture, immediately leaned in and like, hey, can you elaborate what you mean right here? They have been taught well to participate in the conversations because the expectation in the modeling classroom is that they are all active participants. That whole idea of building relationship with your students just naturally happens in the modeling classroom. They know that their opinions are valued and they are okay, no matter what they might be. And as we go through the year, part of the reason I love teaching freshmen is I get to see them go from these eighth graders who are completely either terrified about high school or completely excited in high school and think that they are top of the mountain again, like they were in the eighth grade. And I see them shift into these amazing students towards the end of the year. So you can see all of these pictures here are freshmen. I get asked all the time, how do I lead modeling instruction? How do I make this collaboration happen with ninth graders? And this is it. I let them do this. The expectation from day one is we are modelers in here. We are all physicists. I will call them that and tell them they are physicists in the classroom. They know I'm not. I said, physicist is anyone studying science, studying physics. Prove me wrong. Like, oh, I can't. They're all physicists. They're all studying. They're all collaborating together. And this is the joy of my day, is watching them have these wonderful conversations. Notice how they're not even looking at the camera. They're so used to me taking pictures because of how proud I am of them. Okay, moving on to some more of the model deployment. I also want to talk about access. So one thing that I have learned through modeling instruction is that modeling builds access for students. Modeling is inclusion in the classroom. Because of the hands-on nature of modeling instruction, because students are constructing their own meaning, it is possible to make a modeling classroom fit for any level of students. So I teach freshmen now. Those are my freshmen a couple years ago on the right. But on the left, that class is a class for juniors and seniors designed for students with IEPs, with individualized education plans. The majority of the students in that class had struggled. They might have been in a self-contained science classroom, but we designed a physics classroom for them that was supposed to be hands-on, supposed to be very collaborative, it's supposed to be, well, it's modeling instruction. I wrote it completely to make modeling instruction work for these students. So I specifically requested, I would like your students who don't want to take, at the time, students who may have been in our exceptional students program or special education would have taken biology, earth science, and then most of them, they took environmental science. So they were really missing, they didn't get an opportunity to take chemistry or physics. And so we wrote this with the intention that now these students get this choice. And a lot of them chose it. What you can see in that picture, I love the joy on the student's face in the background. What they were doing is had been studying waves. We've done some paradigm labs using slinkies, determining what makes a wave pulse move, what happens when a wave pulse reflects off of a rigid barrier or a flexible barrier. And I realized my students had never made a cup and string telephone. So this is them, the utter joy. You cannot see the end of that string, but way in the distance, there's another building. So they were making a cup and string telephone. They told me it must be the world's largest. I did not disavow this notion, but they were filming it in slow motion. They wanted to see the wave travel down the string. And so it fit the model they had seen before. They saw that they had created a pulse using sound at one end. That pulse traveled down the string. They were able to see that happening. Slow motion cameras on cell phones are a wonderful invention for waves exploration. And so these students were excited to show that their model worked. It fit with something like a cup and string telephone. And I absolutely love that modeling instruction has made my classroom inclusive. And we can, whether it's a student who might be struggling academically, or in my current school, we do have quite a few refugee and immigrant students whose first language is not English, who are in our English language development programs. Because my classroom is collaborative, student-driven, and thrives on students creating their own models, we are very inclusive of those English language learners. They're able to participate at the same level as their peers. They're able to communicate with other students. I honestly don't care if sometimes those conversations they're having about their lab are in Spanish. It doesn't matter because they're still having that conversation. And so then when we get into, you can see on the right, they are in small groups. They're doing a poster session. We're learning how to, run a poster session like they might see if they go to a scientific conference. They're going around, they're asking questions of one another. The students with the posters are explaining what's going on. And it's another way for them to deploy that model they have. We call this, in my classroom, we call this experts and traveling scholars. And so the traveling scholars are going around and learning a little bit more about how their model that they have developed during the Paradigm Lab can be then deployed to explain other situations. Throughout the modeling cycle, we're not only going to deploy, we're also going to redevelop that model. I said whiteboarding is a staple of modeling instruction. So I wanted to give some examples of how my students might do some of this. These are some of the whiteboards that they have created. And you can see like on the top right, this is students from a junior senior level physics class coming up with some representations for the motion of two objects, whereas the model they developed was for a singular object. And so they're trying to explain what's going on using multiple representations. All of these aspects of their model have been developed during their Paradigm Lab, and now we can kind of use it to explain the situation. On the right, these are students from a freshman Physics First course who are now using the model they developed. Now we're looking at air resistance. Part of computational modeling in Physics First is using the computer as a new tool to explore more difficult models. One of those being air resistance. With freshmen, I don't know that I would ever have them fully explore air resistance or create an equation or a function that would explain the motion of something that is falling with air resistance acting on it. But because we can use the computer as a tool to give them a little bit more backing, they can explore something a little more difficult. So here they are looking at these coffee filters, dropping them, looking to see if they are, you can see in the top, they're looking at like time to hit the floor, and they're testing, it says two coffee filters, 4 and 6. At the bottom, they decided they're gonna look and see if mass affects air resistance. Very roughly same question, but you can see that the students came up with their own. They were able to take the model for motion that we had previously and models that we have developed for forces previously, combine the two of these and now create their own question. Now we're going to redevelop and refine the model that we had, combining the two of those together. So great conversation happened out of this, because not only do my students see that something is going on here and it's not quite fitting this model for free fall or uniform acceleration that they had before, but if we combine that with what we know about forces and that model there, we can now come up with this new idea. And that's the whole point. The model is student created. I had to include the picture on the right. One of my students came to school with, as you do, a blow up dinosaur suit on and wanted to take a picture with the whiteboard because, of course, the Tyrannosaurus Rex would join a whiteboard meeting. But these are examples of how my students made those explanations. So on the one in the top left, I always tell my students, I will be their scribe. So this is during one of my junior, senior classes. This is the whiteboard on our wall. You can see different colors there. As we came up with, add more things to what we know about motion, we started adding things to our wall. So I miss that classroom for that reason. We had big whiteboards just hung on the wall. And then as we went through the unit, students would add things to that. We would add what we know so far and how we've refined our model to the wall there. You can see that one, we're doing a little bit of computation because you can see it says 1 tick for every second. I learned to model. I learned physics using mechanics through those resources through AMTA, and they are phenomenal. But something lit up inside me when I went through the computational modeling the first time around, when I went through the development workshop, because it is so modern, the way of looking at things. Our students have computers. They are aware of how this works. Most of our students have grown up at this point, have grown up creating, taking videos on their phone, knowing what a slow motion video is, or taking, my students, we always relate it to bursts of photos on their phone. They can hold down the button and it will take bursts. It's 1 tick for every, I don't know, however many seconds they get. And so computational modeling makes that connection. You can see that 1 tick for every second, constant distance between ticks. That's part of them building the computational portion of their model of motion. On the bottom left, that one is also a model of motion. You can see they've kind of built out what are all the things that we know about motion? How can we relate this all together? And they do have that bubble on the top left is the computational piece to that. They've constructed a function that has a domain and a range that has some initial parameters, and they're able to explain motion using that function. Well, but modeling instruction would not exist without training more modelers. And so this is another part of what I do. And this absolutely brings me joy. And I brought in things from a variety of instances doing this. So like, for example, on the top left, that's actually my classroom again. That was just a Saturday running through an introduction to modeling instruction with their teachers who teach chemistry, biology, anatomy, physiology, geology, middle school in that room. And we're all learning how we can implement some of the aspects of modeling instruction in our classroom. For that one, we were talking about energy. That's common thread that runs throughout all scientific contents. And actually, I believe is one of the largest strengths of modeling instruction. Energy is such a difficult concept for students. But the way modelers, we have developed it across content areas is amazing. And students are able to represent it well. With my students, I start the year with energy, and they are able to use it as their explanations as we go throughout the year. So that is one of the examples of training more modelers. And now many of the people in that room have gone through, got excited by that, and have taken modeling workshops as a result of that. Other pictures throughout in the bottom left, that would be a mechanics course. And so they're working on learning everything, energy, motion, forces, two-dimensional motion, orbital motion, working through. Modeling workshops, I feel, are the best way to learn any new pedagogy. We are in all of these pictures, we are in student mode. We're bringing out those preconceptions our students have so that we can address them, because nothing's more difficult in teaching than having a student come up with some question out of left field that you are not prepared for. And so one of the best things modeling workshops have done is that institute that student mode, so that I can throw out in student mode that question that I think my 14, 15-year-old students would ask, and we can practice what our response would be. So these modeling workshops are, I feel, the best way to not only spread modeling instruction and make sure that, we keep something I highly believe in, and I know Jane believes in. Jane's devoted her life to it. Keep it going for more students. It's one thing to teach, I have 120 students this year. It's one thing to teach my 120 students, and they will be fantastic scientists because they've learned to do science the way scientists do science. But it's another to then teach all of these people who may also teach 120 students a year, and the impact that we can have on the way that students learn to do science is astronomical. It's phenomenal to think about. So this is one of those things that I strongly believe in is learning to model by doing modeling instruction, by being in student mode, by doing science the way that my students learn to do science. And I wanted to kind of finish with this. These are some things I have gotten from, on the left, that would be from another teacher from a modeling workshop, saying that modeling puts students in charge of their learning through cooperative group work, argumentation with evidence, critical thinking, and community interaction. Teachers act as facilitators of learning. And that's how I feel. In today's educational environment, especially in Arizona, where I am, it's rough. We had in 2018, before the walkout Arizona teachers did in the spring of 2018, we had 159 active physics teachers in the state. That number has actually declined. And it can be really rough to be a teacher in this area. Teaching my students to do science means that I have that joy every single day of coming in and watching them be scientists, watching them learn together, watching those light bulbs go off. And I am not feeling like I am having to put on a performance every single day. My students are the ones who do the majority of the work. And so I would not do anything differently. On the right is a note from one of my freshmen. I love the way that she wrote that and crossed off the probably, and saying that physics was definitely the most conceptually hard class she's ever taken, but it was also pretty fun. So my students are challenged on a daily basis, even though they are the ones in charge of their learning. They're the ones driving the instruction, and I am that facilitator rather than that sage on a stage. They are challenged, and it is a challenging class for them. I have a lot of freshmen and their parents who come in and are concerned that their students are thrown into a physics class their freshman year. And I have to, disavow this notion that they can't handle it, that they absolutely can. Where the math that we use is Algebra 1, although I do set up the basics of calculus for them. And when I see seniors in the hallway, AP Calculus class is just across the hall from me. When I see them, they're like, I remember the stuff that you taught us because you taught us in such a way that we remember what it means to find the area under a line, what it means to find the slope of a line. They remember all this stuff because they were doing science all the time. And that's why one of those reasons I strongly believe in modeling instruction, not only because of my experience as a high schooler understanding that, that more active class lit some fire under me and made me more excited to come to physics every single day, but also that I get that feedback from my students that they, even though the class is challenging, see it as rewarding when they earn that when they earn that grade, when they see that model fit some new situation, when they are able to argue with evidence. This past week, we took our state testing, which for my students is the ACT Aspire test. And I actually had students, made my day. My students told me the science section was easy. They were looking at graphs and data tables and things that we do all the time in their class, and said, well, that was easy. But none of it had anything to do with the content that I teach. All of it had to do with the pedagogy that I use. And with that, I know that there were questions when people signed up. I would be more than happy to answer questions. And I can also put my email in the chat just in case. Jane, I don't know how you would like to do this. Would you like me to call in people?
Yes.
What would you like to do?
Yes.
Okay. Diana, I see you with your hand up. What question can I answer for you?
Hi, I took one of the modeling workshops and I really loved the class and I said, this is how I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. Then I went to the classroom and I found out that the students didn't feel that way. They did not like it. They wanted me to tell them what to write down. They just wanted me to give them the PowerPoint. They just wanted the information. And yes, my job is to prepare them for a Regents exam. And I knew that the Regents wasn't going to match what the modeling was teaching. I don't know if you've dealt with that problem and like how you've addressed it.
Yeah, and I saw someone, I don't know if they're on here. I saw someone when they signed up mentioned this kind of push back. We all know, those of us who've been teaching long enough know we kind of have these cycles in education. There's like push back towards, oh, we should just go back to direct instruction. And I've gotten that push from student, not only students, but administration, who said, oh, I should just lecture more. And I've gotten that over the years. I am very stubborn. It's also a reason why I am highly active and serve as our district union president, because I have just been pushing back and saying, this is how research shows, this is how students learn physics best. Research shows this is how students learn science best. Modeling instruction has a wealth of research to back it. And I have been stubborn. From the very first day in my class, I set it up like, these are your notes. This is what you're going to do. What I've started doing, especially with my freshmen, is they will do recaps of every time we do something where they're talking with another, they will do recaps and they will create their own notes. And so that's how I've kind of started bridging that. With some of my class periods, we'll then go, okay, well, let's compile all of our notes. What did you hear that was important? And I'll write it on the board. So that's kind of their notes. They think it's the lecture or whatever that they want. But what it is them creating their own meaning out of those whiteboard meetings and coming back and just writing it down again. I'm a strong believer, if they hear it multiple times, it's better for them. If they write it down, it's even better. So anytime I can get them to just discuss in small groups and write down what they are discussing, I feel is going to be amazing for them. But you're right. I have, especially with freshmen, I have them come in and they think science is one way. And a lot of my kids are coming in from schools where memorization and preparing for that test is part of it. And with the Regents exam, I would strongly encourage, I know we have some strong New York modelers who can speak more on that and give you a better idea. Mark Schober is a name that comes to mind if you know him. Shauna Glazenberg is another one that would be great to reach out to and make connections with, because they have used modeling in their classroom, and were able to kind of prepare students for that Regents exam, because you do have to, of course, make some modifications so that you make sure you're reaching all that content for that. Benjamin.
Good morning, or I don't know what time it is there. I guess if you're in Arizona, it's still morning. So thank you so much for that presentation. That was excellent. I feel like anybody who knows anything about modeling would probably be able to echo everything that you said there. I have a question that might be related to Paul's and also is somewhat related to Diana, I believe, who just asked a related question. I'm not a rookie to modeling. I know lots about modeling and other methods of teaching physics, but I get this question a lot, so I wanted to sort of hear your response to it. If you teach modeling, particularly to ninth graders, one of the things you end up doing is limiting yourself to just mechanics. And there are people who quickly ask, are we really fully teaching physics if we only teach them mechanics? Have you ever heard that question? And I'm curious how you responded to it.
I have, and I'm going to kind of answer. I see Paul's question too. I'm answer that. I have. I don't teach just mechanics. So my current role, I'm the only one at my school who teaches what we call physics first. The rest of the classes teach what we call conceptual physical science. A big portion of that is certification needs. We can't call it physics unless it's a physics certified teacher. And while my school has several, you probably tell by the attitude of my principal has attracted quite a few physics certified people. So it means I get to kind of play around and do what I want. So my students, since we do computational modeling, since they've set it up, my instructional units that I use are energy, constant velocity, uniform acceleration, balanced, unbalanced forces. And then I've worked in what I want. I've done two-dimensional motion with my students, but we're working right now, we're in a waves unit. Waves, and then we're going to move on to electrostatics. And I've gotten the argument a lot that, well, the students need they don't have the math to support it. And for mechanics, that's an easy one for me to defend. It's like algebra 1 is really what they need. I don't need to use any trigonometry with my students. We have done two-dimensional motion, and they've understood how things like the angle can affect the range of a projectile, but we don't get into the trigonometry quite yet. With waves and electrostatics, we do keep it more conceptual when I can. I do bring in modeling chemistry does a wonderful job with proportional reasoning. And so that is one of the things that I am teaching my students to do is look at proportional reasoning, how if I change one thing. So for example, we're going to look at how changing frequency and wavelength might affect, or frequency or wavelength would affect one or the other using that proportional reasoning. My students also have the opportunity to take AP physics. So I know what I'm setting them up for later, should they want to. And I get it that the understanding would be, physics requires more work. But at the same time, I also see that as a giant gatekeeper. And I don't want to keep any of my students from having access to physics. You saw the class I had earlier that was students, mainly students with IEPs and students who were struggling to pass a third science class, because in Arizona, they have to have 3 to graduate. And for that class, even those junior seniors, I also only used Algebra 1, because for them, it may have been the only chance they get to take a physics course. And knowing that a lot of my students I had students who wanted to go into the construction industry, students who were already working as auto shops, learn to be mechanics, students who were going to go work with their parents' electricians, electrical business. Kind of important for my students to understand physics, even if they don't understand all the math that we may need to do a university level physics. Even when I've taught Physics 101 at the community college level, I still made sure that my students understood concepts at the level that was appropriate for them and didn't overload it with unnecessary math. And I will say computational modeling does a wonderful job. I don't want to, I can blare my own horn on that one. But we wrote it in such a way to where they're using a lot of difficult mathematical concepts, breaking it down into differential steps to make that math much more accessible. So I have students in my freshman class who are working with things that may have a changing acceleration, but because we can make everything in small little steps, the mathematical portion is much simpler for them and makes sense to them. This is a question I could go on and on and on and on about. I see Michelle answer the question, said, I taught my kids well how to actually participate, and how do you do that? Big part is my stubbornness. No, I said from absolutely day one, I am not a person who's going to sit there and read rules at them or even read a syllabus for them. We do active participation from absolutely from day one. If I see this part, we'll say this time of year, for all of you who teach high schoolers, you know that April just can be awful, especially since my students, we get out of school right before Memorial Day. So they see that light at the end of the tunnel, and it is almost prom time and graduation time, AP testing time. So that they are starting to lag. And one of the things that I continually do, being that facilitator in the classroom, is make sure if we're lagging, modeling instruction does not mean that I'm doing model deployment and we're doing worksheets for days on end. One of those things we did this week was to find the spring constant. They've just done, looking at mechanical waves, find the spring constant of a pogo stick. But to do that, we got to take it outside and write it. A lot of my kids never done that before. I am getting them to actively participate by not only encouraging them to talk to one another. For a lot of them, that is not usual fare in their classes, and also continually going back to that model deployment and refinement, because that brings back something much more active for them to do. So on a daily basis, they are talking to one another, they are working in teams, they are likely playing with some sort of equipment to see something, they're coming up with new ideas. And because I am that facilitator, they know that if they ask a good question, we just may get some lab equipment out so they can explore it. Jamie, John, go ahead.
I believe we were together at the 2017 Computational Modeling Physics First at Teachers College, and we spent about a week learning a special computer language called Pirate. And I was just wondering if you still use that with the computational modeling part.
We absolutely do. In fact, I'm going to put the link in the chat so everybody can check it out. Yes, computational modeling uses a language called Pirate. That's Python and Racket kind of put together. So it was designed mainly for Algebra 1 instruction. It is very user-friendly. We do use it because, well, number one, we have a direct line. Bootstrap designed it. And so we have a direct line to make changes. Like, for example, one of the changes they're making is working on a beta version of including units with numbers and giving feedback to students. So when the units don't quite match up, it tells the students to check their units again. I absolutely love how they've written this in. So instead of most computer language, you're going to get an error code. We're getting feedback. Says, take a look at this highlighted portion. It's very good for making sure for student use, the students kind of look and check things out. And another thing, it actually uses the physics language that we know. So my students are writing functions to do this. That's another portion we did functions from early August. I start right at the end of July. So early August, my students are writing functions. They haven't gotten there in Algebra 1 yet, by the time they do get there in Algebra 1, they know what domain is, they know what range is, they know input, output, parameters, they know how to write a function, they know how to evaluate a function, they know how to evaluate a function within a function. We've done all of this setting up because they're getting something visual out of it. They're making this video game, essentially. And so, yeah, we've been using Pirate. We would probably always use Pirate because it is the easiest thing to kind of teach our students. And then a lot of my students who go on to learn Python or Java or C++ or whatever language that they're using in their coding class, they're like, oh, I hate to say it, I almost want to look to make sure nobody I teach with is in here, but I have had students say that we learn more computer programming in their physics class than they did in their computer programming class. I think it's just because we cover the basics so widely. Let's see. I saw Jamie ask the question, do you find your class covers all the required topics each year? No, students begin to work much slower than they were before COVID. Yeah, that's a loaded question. When I first started teaching, I was teaching AP Physics B. Anybody remembers that one? It was drink from the fire hose version of physics. I mean, it was like a mile wide and an inch deep. It was a terrible version of physics. And I had to quickly make peace with the fact that I might not get through everything. I do cover the required topics each year, but I have had to, with the slow work, maybe pick and choose. And a lot of times my pick and choose might be on the extra stuff that I have worked in addition to whatever we are required. I've also made sure that I'm on those curriculum committees when we get together every summer, so I can put that reasoning forth for why students don't need to know everything. And our Arizona state standards aren't NGSS, but we have essential and plus standards. And I've made the case to can we cut all the plus standards, which does include things like momentum. And plus standards, take it out. If people want to add it back in, it's great. So we'd be able to kind of get down what we have to essential standards would cover motion, forces, energy, waves. And notice I teach electrostatics. I feel that was something I like to add extra. I do even teach a unit of some basic chemistry concepts because my students go to AP chemistry as their sophomore level course. So give them a little bit of a leg up. I see Elliot's for someone who already implemented modeling in physics first, but not towards AP Physics 1 yet. How can I differentiate what's different between both? That's a great question because I had kids who would take junior level physics and then AP Physics when I was teaching AP Physics. I tried to do different labs. I also skipped through a lot of the kinematics that I had taught before and moved, instead of developing new models, or developing models again, I should say, we tried to refine the model. So it would present them with new situations to try first. So anything that I had already done, tried to have them challenge their existing models and refine them a little bit more. And then, yeah, so that when they got to AP, we were never doing the same labs. I was trying to go a little bit deeper into what they did and really trying to get past the content that I had done first to challenge a little bit more. I think just adding in the practice with those free response questions is a great differentiation for them because for a lot of my students, those questions are the way that they're written is not the way that necessarily that I was presenting questions in class. So we would spend a lot of collaboration time on that. That's a lot of model deployment for that. Okay. Other questions out there? I see Jamie commenting about developing like state standard. Yeah, it is disappointing when people we still have that problem. People are just committed to that one thing that they want to do, and it's hard to cut those topics out. I and I will repeat it again, and my students took that ACT Aspire test just this past week, just Tuesday and Wednesday, and told me the science section was easy for them. That made my year, telling me that they were able to read and analyze, interpret data, even though the content was not things that they had seen yet, meant that I was doing something right. And to me, that's what it's all about. I've had students reach out and to tell me that they years later, they're in their 20s and 30s, reach out and be like, oh, I loved your class. And actually ask me, I don't remember the stuff. What did we learn again? I don't remember the content that you taught, but I know that you taught us to ask questions, to listen well, to collaborate with others, to communicate clearly, all of those skills that modeling instruction does really well that'll apply to anything that they do in life. And I will always push back at my fellow educators. I don't know that the content is necessarily the important piece. The students who go on to learn to study physics more will get that content again, will dig into that content, and those skills will still be there, but it's all about teaching them those skills, and modeling does that well. Oh, I love that question, Ray. Thank you for that one. Now, Ray's asking about the comments from the math teachers in your school about how those mathematical symbols, using that for physical system influences students' ability to make sense of equations. So the Algebra 1 teacher and I at school have actively began making sure that what we do matches up this year. To give you an idea, he teaches the pre-AP Algebra 1. So if you know, that is a very widely used resource there. And so we have began making sure that not only our vocabulary, but our approach, those mathematical symbols we're using for the same reasons. It has very much influenced the ability for students to make sense of equations. It has 100% influenced students' ability to work with functions. A big part of, I'll plug computational modeling, physics first. Again, big part of that is there is research showing that functions are the concept in Algebra 1 that students trip over. They struggle with functions. And so since in physics, I am teaching them to work with functions very early on in the school year, and we continue that through, the algebra teachers have said it makes their lives so much easier. Students don't even blink an eye at that one. They understand what to do with function. They understand when they are being asked to evaluate the function. So it's, I love when this is coming together. That now I work with an algebra teacher. We've been working together past 3 years, and now that we can kind of make those connections between classes. And when I did two-dimensional motion in my class this year, it was 100% because they had started looking at quadratic functions in his class. And so we were deliberately making those ties together so that students could get a much deeper experience out of it. And as much as they groaned, they were very happy to see, they're like, oh my gosh, the math I learned worked. They were very excited about it. Thank you for that comment, Jeremy. Yeah, the science practices. Yeah, I want my students to be strong citizens, and that data literacy, understanding how to ask and explore questions in a much more scientific manner will make them better citizens. I'm looking back to see if I missed any questions here. I don't know.
No, that's great. And just want to point out that Melissa will be joining the coffee hour talk coming up on Thursday. And so if you have any extra questions that didn't occur to you, bring them to the coffee hour if you can, if you're available. And there, I put the registration link in the chat, and it's also in your emails. So hope to see some of you or all of you there on Thursday.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being patient with the later start time for the coffee hour. That 5 p.m. Eastern would have been right in the middle of my school day. So,
yeah, and we try to cover the globe. It's not easy.
Yeah. And I will definitely, I see the question about how to teach them to actively participate. will be in my classroom in the coffee hour, so I will gladly show you some of the ways that I do that.
Excellent.